So we're going to do a little bit of design theory and do some explanations on transistor amplifiers, how to set the gain, how to figure out the input impedance, how to set the filters, and so on. So let's begin. So I'm going to do this in EagleCAD. This is not supposed to be an Eagle tutorial, but this is what I'm familiar with. But we're only doing the schematic design here, so this should all still apply regardless of what system you're using. This will also help you in choosing values when changing and manipulating and modding your pedals. So the first thing I do right here is I have my input signal, and I want to decouple it from any of the DC noise that might be coming in. I do that by using a capacitor, and we will use a 100 nanofarad capacitor just because they're common. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a filter here because we're going to be making a voltage divider in a minute. I'm going to use the LPB-1's values from electroharmonics just because they're common, and it's a simple circuit to analyze, which this will definitely work with. Now, the reason that we're going to go over the LPB-1 is it is a boost pedal, sure, but because it's using a transistor as its basic amplifier, that can be applied to a lot of other pedals. So if you look at schematics for other pedals like the big Muff Pi, for example, you see that this little circuit used throughout the schematic. So there's spots on there that you can change and increase or decrease gain and change filterings and so on. And you can find this actually on a lot of fuzz and a lot of distortion pedals. A lot of old school pedals kind of follow this way. So we'll use this as kind of a good way of explaining how to manipulate gain on those, as well as other features. But alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set this resistance value. We're going to set that to 43K. And actually, I might as well just create the other part of the voltage divider here and set this to 430K. Now, these are the values that are used on the LPB-1. Now, I will acknowledge, yes, there's a bajillion different versions of the LPB-1, just like a lot of old electroharmonic schematics. Take a look at the big Muff Pi and find all the combos of resistor and capacitors that were used in different eras. The same is true of a lot of their old pedals, LPB-1 included. But this is the one that I typically see the most. So what do we got right here? Well, the first thing we want to look at is we have a high-pass filter. Why is it a high-pass filter? Because we have a signal going into a capacitor, which goes to a resistor, which is going to ground. Okay? High-pass filter. Which means high frequencies will pass, and low frequencies will be filtered. So let's calculate where that ends up being. I know, math, everyone's favorite subject, right? This video is going to have a lot of that, so I'll warn you of this now because, yeah, that's a thing. And we're going to be using a lot of math to figure these values out because transistor amplifiers are a little bit tricky and require math. So, all right, this is the formula you would use to figure out the filter cutoff. So we know we got 2 times pi. R2 we know is 43K. And we know the capacitor is 100 nanofarads, so 0.0000001. And that equals roughly 37 hertz. So that basically means any frequency that's above 37 hertz is going to pass, and any frequency below is going to get cut. And the further down it is, the more it'll cut. It's not like just a straight drop off. It's a curve. So we have a 37 hertz cut. Now you got to figure out a little bit of biasing math. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. So how do we bias this transistor for amplification? So let's take our transistor. We have an on semi 2N5088, pretty common, high gain, does the business. Well, the first thing we're going to need to do is we need to figure out the voltage at the base of the transistor, which we've set with this voltage divider. So we're going to have to do some math here. Voltage divider will be VIN times R2, and all of that is going to be over R1 plus R2. Now, it's not these values per se, R1, R2, whatever. It's position in this voltage divider. So the thing getting the positive voltage is going to be considered, as far as this is concerned, as R1, and the thing getting the ground is going to be considered as R2. So what I'm saying there is if I change this to like R19 and R20 like that, then it would be R20 and R19. So that's how to look at that. But anyways, now we're just getting into semantics here. We can determine the value of the voltage divider by, well, we know the voltage in is, that's 9 volts. That's what the battery is supplying, or the wall wart. And we know we got 43. Actually, why am I doing this here? Let's change that to 9. Change that to 43,000. And then we'll change that to 43. Back that up. Yeah, R1. R1 is 430,000 plus R2. I guess it doesn't really matter in this case. Anyways, but yeah, so we get that value right there, and that comes out roughly 0.82 volts. So the voltage at the base of that transistor is equal to that. So that means right here, let's do a little note, 0.82 volts. And info. So we know right there, that's what we got. Cool. Now we need to figure out what the voltage at the emitter is. So let's put in some resistors here to round out that LPB-1 cloning here. Typically I see 390 ohms right there, and then, whoops, I'll see 10K right here. Connect these up to their respective DC powers here. All right. And then give that a little bit of an out. All right. So let's do some math. So we know at the base of the transistor we got 0.82 volts. Now we need to find out the voltage at the emitter. The voltage at the emitter is going to be equal to the voltage at the base minus the VBE of the transistor. Now, how are we going to figure out the VBE of the transistor? I'm going to do this I don't want to say the lazy way, but well, you're going to see here in a second. This is kind of not super exact. So here's the data sheet for the 2N5088 from On Semiconductor's website. And down here, we're going to have to look at some graphs, but figure 9 on voltages is basically what we're looking for here. And what we're trying to do is we're going to try to bias the transistor at half voltage. So half of your battery voltage, is, if you have a 9-volt battery or a 9-volt supply, is going to be 4.5 volts. If you got one of those like double supplies where you put in 18 volts to get yourself some more headroom, then the bias will be done at 9 volts. But we're going to go with the idea of a 9-volt battery, 4.5 volt bias. As you can see here on this chart, I don't get a VBE of 4.5 volts, so I'm going to have to play with a 5-volt line, which it's going to be close, but it's not going to be exact. You'll have to do some fudging to get your whereabouts. So the next thing we need to look up is, all right, where is our current? So the current right now you can basically estimate to be somewhere between 300 and 500 microamps. So that's going to be in here somewhere. So using that, we're going to be looking at this line. We know this line is going to go up as the voltage drops. So somewhere around 0.65 volts-ish. So we know, looking at the schematic, we got a base voltage of 0.82 volts. We are going to use, just as an estimate, for our VBE of 0.65 volts. And that's a common one you're going to see for the 2N5088. If you go on like DIY stomp boxes, that's where you're going to find you'll find that commonly used in the forums there. And so that equals 0.17 volts. So what that means is going out of the emitter, we got a voltage of 0.17 volts. So we can do a little note there. Volts and apply. All right. So now we know that. Now what we need to know is we need to know what the current going out this emitter pin is going to be. So the current, the I, if you will, let's use Ohm's law. Current is going to be equal to voltage over resistance. So we have the voltage of the emitter pin over the resistance of R3, which we know to be 390, and we know this to be 0.17. So that is equal to 0.000436, or you can look at that as 436 microamps. So that's the current running through that resistor, or leaving, I should say, out of the emitter pin. So this is kind of one of those rough assumptions, but you're going to be pretty dang close if you do. I don't want to get into the super technical stuff, but with transistors that have a large beta value, which pretty much almost all your modern day silicon transistors do, that are through hole. Now, yeah, there are some older ones that are exceptions to that are very low gain, low beta transistors, and then when you get into like germanium transistors, there's a lot that fall under that category, where you would have to worry about your math a little bit more. But in the case of silicon transistors, like you would see in most guitar pedals, you're going to be fine using this assumption that the current that's going out this way is going to be the same current that's going in this way, close, roughly. So we can now make the assumption that R4 has the same current going out, so we know that it too has 436 microamps. So now we can figure out what the collector voltage is right here. So the collector voltage, that's the thing we're trying to bias. That's the thing we're trying to make hit 4.5 volts. So collector voltage is equal to voltage supply minus the current times the value of R4, the resistance. And so that means we have R4, which is a 10K resistor. We have the current, which is 0.000436. And we have the input voltage as 9 volts. We know that, well, let's break that down, because I kind of want to show this math more precisely. We have 9 minus 4.36, which equals to 4.64 volts. So that's actually pretty close to biased. It's not exactly 4.5 volts like we want it to be, but it's pretty dang close. But now let's look at what you would have to do to fix that value, to get it even closer, to be more precisely biased. We could, case in point, change the voltage divider, which is what you would most likely do. But to get that voltage divider down, to get 4.5 volts, to go through all this math again and land that on 4.5 volts, we would have to get that V base with that voltage divider. We'd have to get that down to 4.815. Oh no, 4.8. No, not 4. What am I talking about? 8.255 volts. Yeah, there we go. So the difference there is 5.5 millivolts of difference. So to get that precise of a value, we would have to change, like, R2 would have to be like 43.4K. R2. And then R1 would have to be like 426K. These are not values that you easily can find in a resistor bin at, well, I would say formerly your Radio Shack, but I guess they don't exist anymore. But anyways, it's not a common resistor value. You're not going to find that in a common resistor pack of some sort. Can you get these specific of resistor values online, like DigiKey or Mauser or something? Sure. But even those have tolerances, so you're not going to get those exact values even if you do buy them. Or at least not likely. So getting that value to be dead on, you could either use a trimmer pot, like a potentiometer, little rheostat type of deal, where you can just dial in the voltage exactly. But if you are trying to avoid using trimmer pots, that's how you can calculate it. And again, 4.64 volts isn't that bad. It just means that the voltage is going to rail a little high and not so much on the low, so it won't be, quite as loud, but it'll be pretty close. So that'll give you how you bias the transistor, which is pretty much a lot of information right there. But now I know everyone's screaming about, but what about the gain? Let's get the gain. All right, let's do the gain. Actually, let's do the gain. So to do the voltage gain's pretty simple. Comparatively to that mess we just did right there. Voltage gain is going to be simply R4 over R3. Okay, not a big deal. So that one we can do pretty quickly. That's 390 and 10K. So that gives us a gain of 25.641 or a decibel. If you want to figure out decibels, just go online and look up a voltage gain to decibel calculator. It's a lot easier. But it gives you roughly 28 dB. So, but we're going to ignore dB for right now because the voltage gain is kind of what we want to focus on. And heck, I'm going to even round down and just say that this has a voltage gain of 25. So we have like a easy number to play with. So a 25 voltage gain. So what does that mean? So that means if I got 0.001 volts or millivolt going in, going out, I will have a 0.025 volt or 25 millivolt signal going out. So that's pretty cool. Now, if you're looking at guitar signals, like that's kind of like a thing. It's like, okay, I can see the gain, but what's a guitar signal? What's that in reference? These voltage values mean nothing to me. Okay, well, let's actually put some perspective there. So if we were to take actually got some little pictures of this here. Microsoft Paint. That's right, Paint. Everyone's favorite buddy. So right here is a snapshot on my oscilloscope of a guitar signal. This is a single coil pickup, a neck pickup with 4.8K resistance on it. So pretty weak pickup. Standard tuning on a Fender Strat, and I just plucked the A string. So as you can see, nothing, and then all of a sudden you got your attack on the string. Now notice that the voltage divisions right here are in 20 millivolts, so that means every line right here going this way is 20 millivolts. And then you can notice the time division right here. Every line is a half second here. So at the initial attack, you can see that I got 30 millivolts of signal, and then it decays. And then after about 2 seconds of time, now we're closer to about 15 millivolts. Peak to peak, by the way. So you double those values when looking at it as a whole. So it started at 60 millivolts peak to peak and ended at about 30 millivolts peak to peak after about 2 seconds. So that's me plucking the string and then letting it ring out. And as you can see, the voltage decreases as it rings out longer. Now, when you look at like full-blown chords, for example, you get a different bit of reading here. So notice that my indication for voltages has increased. Each line is now 50 millivolts. but the time has remained the same. So each line is still half a second. And in this case, we got, that initial strumming of an E major chord on that same pickup on that same strat. And now all of a sudden we got, let's see, so 50, actually right here we got a big jump right there. So 50, almost a little over, actually no, that's about 100 millivolts on that jump right there. So we're going to probably be looking at about a 200 millivolt peak to peak. And then after about 2 seconds, it decays down to about, 40 millivolts, 80 millivolts peak to peak. And then if you got something, let's take a look at that same E major chord, but let's do this on my Les Paul. So on a bridge pickup that's a humbucker even, so we'll go bridge pickup, which usually has higher resistance. So a bridge pickup, humbucker on a Les Paul, 8.3K of resistance on that pickup, and that's still actually pretty low gain on for a pickup for a humbucker. But anyways, you can see here again the divisions now is 200 millivolts. The time still being the same, half a second per line, and you can see that we've like spiked all the way up into the 700s and 800 millivolts. So we're getting close to 1.6 volts peak to peak. Sure, it decays over time to 300 millivolts peak to peak, 150 millivolts after about 2 seconds. But that's something to consider when you're looking at your guitar signal. So when you go right here and you say, okay, that first example where I had a 60 millivolt peak to peak, 0.060 millivolts times 25, that's what is that here? So 25 times 0.6. Yeah, that's equal to 1.5 volts. So yeah, 1.5 volts, that's less than 9 volts. So that's going to amplify just fine. No worries even at full bore. But now let's take a look at that other one where we were getting 800 millivolts, so 1.6 volts peak to peak. So 1.6 times 25, much bigger deal. Why did that not work? Try that again there, computer. Yeah. Oh, wow. I should have been able to do that one in my head, honestly. That's terrible. Anyways, that's 40 volts. Now, at first it's like, well, that's what the math says, and that's what it should be. Well, technically, yes. But here's the problem with that. 40 volts is bigger than 9. What does that mean? So let me do a little bit of paint again. So in paint, we can show that we have our guitar signal, and then we have our rails. So here's our rails actually, and then we have our guitar signal here from down the center. This is our bias. And then if I were to draw a guitar signal in here, you got something like this. Pardon my paint skills. But if you amplify that signal and it goes all the way up like this and all the way down like this, the problem with that is these rails cut that. So you're not going to get this noise up here or this down here. It's going to clip it right around here. And right here, it's going to clip it right around here. That's called hitting the rails. And when you get these little clips right here, that's what you call distortion. And so when you're doing this right here and you're calculating out your gain and you see that, it's like, oh yeah, if I strum that E chord really heavy on that Les Paul, on that bridge humbucker, and I have the dial on this thing full up, I'm going to get some breakup. I'm going to get some distortion right out of that transistor because it's going to slam the rails of the power and it can't do anything about it. So that's something to take into consideration. So why I say all that is you can change these resistor values to decrease and increase the gain. So one thing a person may do is they may decrease the value of this resistor to increase the gain, because maybe distortion is actually what you're trying to accomplish right here. So you can drop that value, that will increase the value of the gain, which will cause more slamming into the rails. However, you may be a person who's trying not to do that. You're trying to eliminate clipping. So by reducing the value, or sorry, increasing the value of R3 to a larger resistor, that will change the amount of gain output. However, when you're doing that, you will have to go back through all those biasing calculations to make sure everything else is matching properly, because that's kind of the thing with this is, so you got to set your voltage divider to match that, which in turn is going to set your value of your filter right here. So again, these are just things you got to take into consideration when you're designing. Now we'll add another little bit of quagmire to this. We got to still change something with the signal here. We need to put a decoupler again. So I'm going to put another 100 nanofarad capacitor here. Why am I doing this? Because we have DC voltage coming in on this line. So that's going to cause some issues when we try to do anything with the signal. So we're going to break that DC voltage out so only the AC is making it through here. And then we're going to put in, lastly, a potentiometer for volume. This is just a 100K pot. We'll make it audio, or we'll assume it's audio for logarithmic for effect. But anyways, we'll call that the output. And so that forms an RC filter right there, because this is basically a resistor, and if you have the volume maxed all the way up, that means you have a 100K resistor going to ground. So now we have 100 nanofarad and 100K resistor, kind of like the 100 nanofarad and the 43K resistor there. So let's again do a little bit of math. 2 times pi times VR1 times C2. And what's that guy? That's 0.0001. And we already established that's 100K. And so that gives us a cutoff frequency of around 16 hertz. So what that's also saying is any frequencies that are making it out here are above 16 hertz, which, yeah, you're not going to really hear anything at 16 hertz and below anyways, so that's pretty good. That gets rid of any like DC harmonic or super low harmonic frequencies, stuff that you're not going to have to worry about. But anyways, that's something to consider. And then I guess we probably should go over one other fact here. Let's go over the impedance values, because that's another thing that's affected by your selection here. Impedance for the input, so let's look at that, is equal to R1 parallel to R2. And then that is to the input impedance of the transistor itself, parallel to, actually, yeah, let's add that in here. One thing I would normally do on a lot of my designs, you'll probably notice this, is I always try to have that anti-pop resistor in there. And let's make it a rather large value, like 2.2 meg. And let's do some calculations there. So that would be that parallel to R5. So I don't want to get too technical on input impedance with transistors, because you can get into a lot of quagmires there. Temperature will become a play. Yes, I know silicon transistors are not supposed to be temperature fluctuating, but with input impedance, it's going to be a thing you need to take into consideration. There's tolerance issues between transistors that aren't going to nail it right, unless you're using something like LT splice. Yeah, if you're trying to do this through like some sort of a simulator, that'll probably give you a better value for your transistor. But yeah, we're gonna do the 1 or 2 thumb rule here and kind of ignore it, because it's going to be so minuscule, it's not going to really affect the value. This will give you closer to ballpark figure. I know that was a lot of rambling, right? If this whole video hasn't been already. So anyways, we'll take this right here. So we got R1, which is 430, and then we'll take R2, which is 43, and then we'll take that 2.2 mega ohm. And that breaks down to basically 39090. And that is equal to roughly 38.4K. So that's the input impedance of this circuit if this was the beginning of the whole beginning of the circuit, which is not all that great. 38K is pretty pathetic considering the ideal rule of thumb is trying to get a 1 meg input impedance. Now, if you're trying to make a pedal that plays nicely with the volume knob on your guitar, like fuzz pedals do, then this is kind of a desired effect. This is what you want. However, if you're trying to get this to sound the same, no matter what guitar is plugged into it, no matter how long your cable between your guitar and this first pedal is, when you're trying to do that, that's when you need those higher impedance values. Now, if this is a part of a circuit, like the fourth stage on the big Muff Pi uses a very, very similar circuit, then the input impedance is not really that big of a deal because the amount of quote-unquote cable is measured in millimeters because it's traces wires actually on the PCB board. Not a big deal. So use that as a consideration. If you're intending to put this at the very beginning of a circuit, then you may want to increase values of like R1 and R2 to get a higher input impedance. But in doing so, again, now you're going to be changing the voltage divider math, you're going to be changing the biasing of the transistor, and that, like I said, there's a lot going into that. Now the last part would probably be the output impedance. Let's finish that out here. The output impedance is a little bit easier to calculate. So Z out is going to simply be R4 in parallel to VR1. So if the volume is maxed on the volume knob, we know VR1 is 100K pot, and we know R4 is 10K. So that equals 9.09K. That's not bad. You typically want to have your output impedance, if this is at the end of a circuit, under 10K. But you try to get it even lower than that. You try to get it around closer to 1K if you can. But this is acceptable, we'll put it that way. It may not play nice with pedals in front of it as it goes higher, but that's, like I said, that's still within the tolerance level. That's going to work with a lot of stuff. But you can change values to, fix that. If you're going, all right, I need it to be lower, you can change down the value of R4. But again, if you change the value of R4, then you change the biasing and all the gain values and all that stuff for the rest of the circuit. So again, these are all these little things that you got to take into consideration when you're doing design. But I guess we should end this on, so what have we learned here? Well, what we've learned is a lot of these resistors and a lot of these capacitors reflect the rest of the circuit. So that's all big deal kind of stuff. But the idea for changing gain on a common emitter amplifier, which this transistor is just simply changing the ratio between R4 and R3 here, and that will change your gain. But again, even so, when you change those values, there may be other things like your bias that you're going to have to tweak to get the signal to work right. So that's transistor amplifiers in a nutshell. I know this is probably one of the more technical videos we've done in a while, so let me know if there's something I could have explained better, if I could have made it easier to follow, I don't know. But yes, if you like what we do here at DIY Guitar Pedals, smash like, subscribe, buy a couple PCBs off of us. That helps support the channel and keeps us going. And again, on the comments below, let me know what you think about this kind of video. Is it too technical? Do we want to back it off? Is there something else you guys would like to see? But yeah, just let me know. Thanks. Cheers.